Victory and celebration. The war had been long, brutal, and filled with sacrifices, but finally, after years of endless battles, the Galactic Alliance had achieved what many believed to be impossible. They had defeated the Dominion. The enemy that had terrorized the galaxy for centuries was finally crushed, their last strongholds destroyed, their fleets scattered, and their leaders either captured or executed. For the first time in generations, peace had returned to the galaxy, and the victors wasted no time in celebrating their hard-earned triumph. Across the core worlds of the Alliance, massive celebrations erupted. Cities were illuminated with bright displays, fireworks exploded across the skies of countless planets, and people filled the streets, cheering, singing, and embracing one another. Soldiers who had fought on the front lines were hailed as heroes, their names immortalized in history, their sacrifices honored by billions. In the grand halls of the Supreme Council, leaders from all allied species raised their glasses in toasts, praising their unity, their strength, and their unbreakable will that had led them to this historic moment. In one of the largest capital cities, Commander Vork, a respected military strategist, stood on a towering balcony overlooking a sea of people below. He had spent decades fighting in the war, leading countless battles, and losing more comrades than he could count. Now, as he gazed at the joyful faces of the people, he allowed himself to believe, for the first time in years, that the nightmare was truly over. He raised his arm, and the crowd erupted in deafening cheers, their voices echoing through the streets like a thunderous wave. "This is a new era," Supreme Chancellor Cadris declared from the central broadcast station, his voice transmitted across the entire alliance. "We have rid the galaxy of tyranny. We have proven that unity will always overcome oppression. And now we will build a future free from war, free from fear." His words were met with overwhelming applause, and across the galaxy, billions celebrated with renewed hope in their hearts. The military command centers, once filled with tense discussions and urgent battle strategies, now stood nearly empty as officers and soldiers joined the festivities. Warships that had once patrolled the borders now hovered above planets in victory formations, their weapons powered down, their shields lowered, a symbol that conflict had finally come to an end. But amidst the joy and celebration, there were still those who could not shake off a sense of unease. Admiral Rylos, one of the highest-ranking officers in the fleet, sat alone in his quarters, staring at the endless stars outside his window. Unlike the others, he did not allow himself to feel relief just yet. Something in his gut told him that this victory was not as absolute as it seemed. A sudden chime broke his thoughts. His personal communicator had received a priority message, something unusual, considering that all military channels were supposed to be inactive for the celebrations. Frowning, he activated the transmission, and an urgent voice filled the room. "Admiral Rylos, sir, we have detected unknown fleet movements on the outer rim." Rylos sat up straight, his body tensing. "Explain," he ordered. "We don't know who they are, sir. They're ships. They don't match any known configurations. They're not Dominion, but their technology is highly advanced. They're approaching at alarming speeds." A cold feeling settled in Rylos's chest. Have they made contact? There was a pause on the other end of the transmission, followed by the officer's voice lowering into an almost fearful whisper. "No, sir, but they know we're watching them. And their heading is straight for the core worlds." Rylos exhaled sharply. The celebration was still in full swing outside his window, but for him, the moment of peace was already crumbling. Something was coming, and deep down, he feared that their war had never truly ended. The cheers and celebrations continued across the core worlds, with fireworks lighting up the skies, music echoing through the streets, and billions of beings rejoicing in their long-awaited victory. Cities that had once been silent under the weight of war were now alive with laughter and song. The Galactic Alliance had finally won. The Dominion was defeated. The suffering was over, or so they believed. Admiral Rylos, however, did not share in the festivities. He stood inside the military command center on Kavoris Prime, staring at the holographic map of the galaxy displayed before him. The unidentified fleet was approaching fast, their trajectory direct and unwavering. There was no doubt they were heading straight for the Alliance's core systems. The question was, who were they, and what did they want? The officers in the room remained tense, watching their leader for orders. They had just ended a war, but now an unknown force was moving toward them. And the timing could not have been worse. Most of their fleets were scattered, their soldiers exhausted, and their defenses lowered in the belief that they had no more enemies left to fight. "We need to identify them immediately," Rylos said, his voice firm and controlled. "Have they responded to any of our hails?" "Negative, sir," one of the communication officers replied. "We've sent multiple transmission requests, but there's been no response. Either they're ignoring us, or they don't communicate like we do." Rylos narrowed his eyes at the data streaming in. The approaching ships were enormous, larger than even the Dominion's dreadnoughts, with energy signatures unlike anything recorded before. It wasn't just the size or technology that unsettled him. It was the way they moved. There was no hesitation, no deviation in their course. This was not an exploration fleet. It was a force that knew exactly where it was going and what it intended to do. His thoughts were interrupted when another officer spoke up, his voice shaky. "Sir, new data coming in. We've managed to intercept a transmission between the unknown ships. It's encrypted, but we were able to decipher part of it." Rylos turned sharply. "Play it." A distorted voice filled the room, deep and mechanical, speaking in an unfamiliar dialect that the translation system struggled to interpret. But one word came through clearly, and when the officers heard it, silence fell over the command center. "Humans." Rylos felt the blood drain from his face. The other officers exchanged nervous glances, their earlier tension now turning into something far worse. Fear. Humans. The word itself carried weight, a legend spoken in hushed tones across the galaxy. They were supposed to be extinct. The Dominion had claimed to have wiped them out long ago, erasing their existence from history. No records remained, no planets bore their name, no evidence suggested they had ever survived. But if this unknown fleet was talking about them, then that meant one terrifying possibility. The humans were not only alive, but on the move. The Supreme Council had to be informed immediately. Rylos wasted no time, sending an urgent transmission directly to Chancellor Cadris, who had been delivering a speech to the Alliance from the capital. The Chancellor's face appeared on the holographic screen, still smiling from the ongoing celebration. But that smile faded the moment he saw Rylos's grim expression. "Admiral, this is an unexpected interruption," Cadris said, his tone slightly annoyed. "Can this not wait until after the victory speech?" "Chancellor," Rylos said, his voice leaving no room for argument, "we have a problem. A fleet is heading for the core worlds. An unknown fleet, and they just mentioned humans." The Chancellor's face turned pale. His mouth opened slightly as if to argue. But no words came out. Around him, other council members, still dressed in their ceremonial robes, froze in place, their joy replaced with pure shock. "That's not possible," Cadris finally said, though his voice was barely above a whisper. "The Dominion wiped them out. Their world was destroyed. They were a myth. Then explain why an unidentified fleet is coming straight for us, and why their transmission included the word humans," Rylos said, his voice growing sharper. "Chancellor, we have to act now. Our defenses are down, our fleets are scattered, and we have no idea what we're dealing with." Cadris hesitated, clearly torn between denial and the growing horror that was creeping into his mind. "How long until they arrive?" he asked, his voice quieter than before. Rylos glanced at the data screen. "At their current speed, less than 24 hours." The room fell deathly silent. The Chancellor inhaled deeply, his gaze hardening. "Then we need to mobilize immediately. Send an emergency recall to all fleets activate planetary defenses, and prepare for potential hostilities. We cannot afford to be caught off guard. Rylos nodded, already issuing orders to his officers. The celebration was over. The fireworks, the music, the laughter. It all meant nothing now. The people of the Alliance believed they had reached an era of peace, but in less than a day, they would face a reality far worse than any war they had ever fought. Because if the humans were truly coming, then the galaxy was about to learn why the Dominion had feared them so much. The once celebrating core worlds of the Galactic Alliance had fallen into stunned silence. News of the approaching fleet had spread quickly among the highest-ranking officials, but outside the military command, the civilians still lived in blissful ignorance. They continued to drink, dance, and cheer for their supposed victory, unaware that something far more terrifying was now on the horizon. Inside the war room on HFY Prime, Admiral Rylos stood rigid, his eyes fixed on the tactical display hovering in front of him. The unknown fleet, the human fleet, was closing in fast, moving with precision that sent chills down his spine. No matter how many times he studied the data, the same horrifying realization returned. These ships were not slowing down. They were not communicating. They were not deviating from their course. They were coming. Beside him, Chancellor Cadris and several members of the Supreme Council struggled to comprehend the situation. They were politicians, not soldiers, and the fear in their expressions was growing with every passing second. This doesn't make sense," one of the councillors stammered, his voice trembling. "The Dominion exterminated them. The war records are clear. Humanity was erased. Their planet was burned. Their systems were glassed." "Then explain that," Rylos said coldly, pointing at the massive fleet on the display. "Because those ships are real. Their energy signatures are real. And unless you want to believe in ghosts, that means humans are real too." The room fell into a heavy silence. No one could argue against the evidence flashing before them. For centuries, the galaxy had feared humanity, but only as a cautionary tale, an old legend about a race too dangerous to exist. The Dominion had supposedly ensured that no trace of them remained. Yet here they were, charging toward the core systems with purpose, and no one knew why. "Maybe they want peace," a younger counselor suggested hesitantly, though even he didn't sound convinced. We don't know if they're hostile." Rylos turned sharply, his expression dark. Peaceful fleets don't move in absolute silence. They don't ignore diplomatic hails. They don't come straight for the heart of the strongest military power in the galaxy immediately after a war has ended. He leaned in, his voice like ice. "This isn't an accident. This isn't diplomacy. This is an invasion." Cadris clenched his jaw. "Have we learned anything else about their ships?" A science officer stepped forward, his eyes glued to his datavat. "Sir, we've run scans on their vessels, and the results are alarming. Their technology is unlike anything we've ever seen. Their hulls are lined with unknown alloys, denser and stronger than Dominion warship armor. Their power cores generate readings that suggest energy outputs exponentially greater than our largest dreadnoughts. And their weapons," he hesitated. "Spit it out," Rylos ordered. The officer swallowed hard. "We estimate that even one of their capital ships could destroy an entire battle group before sustaining significant damage." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Chancellor Cadris gripped the edge of the war table. "How many ships are there?" Rylos exhaled slowly. "Too many." Cadris closed his eyes for a moment, his mind racing. The Galactic Alliance had won a brutal war against the Dominion, but at great cost. Their fleets were battered, their resources drained. Their people were weary of battle. And now this. "Can we win?" Cadris asked quietly. Rylos hesitated. That hesitation alone was answer enough. But the Admiral wasn't the type to give up. His mind was already working through possibilities, strategies, last-ditch efforts. "We don't know their exact capabilities, but we do know this. We can't afford to be caught defenseless. We need to act now. How? A counselor demanded. Our fleets are scattered across the galaxy. It will take days to recall them. Then we don't have days, Rylos said grimly. We need to mobilize every ship within range, every station, every planetary defense. If we don't make a stand before they reach our core systems, we'll never get the chance. A tense silence followed. The decision was clear. Do it, Cadris finally ordered. Put the entire alliance on high alert. Rylos turned to his officers. Begin planetary evacuations for non-essential personnel. Move civilian fleets out of potential combat zones. And tell the fleet commanders that we are at war. The war that should have been over had just begun again. But this time, the enemy was something far worse than anything they had ever faced. The humans had returned, and the galaxy was about to learn why they had once been feared. The Galactic Alliance had moved swiftly, but not swiftly enough. Even with every available fleet recalled, every planetary defense activated, and every system placed on high alert, they were still playing catch-up. The human fleet was advancing faster than predicted, their formations disciplined and unbreakable. There was no communication, no negotiation, only an unrelenting march toward the core worlds. Admiral Rylos stood in the command center of Kevoris Prime, his eyes locked onto the massive holographic display above him. The room was filled with officers, military strategists, and government officials, all whispering anxiously among themselves. The galaxy had not seen this kind of fear in centuries, and now it gripped them like a tightening vice. A deep voice cut through the murmurs. Any response from them? A communications officer turned, his face pale. None, sir. We've sent multiple messages on all standard channels. No reply. No deviation from their course. Chancellor Cadris clenched his jaw. We can't fight an enemy we don't understand, he said, turning to Rylos. What do they want? Rylos exhaled slowly. If I had to guess, vengeance. The word sent a shudder through the room. For centuries, the Dominion had assured the galaxy that humanity was gone, exterminated, wiped from existence, reduced to nothing but whispers of a dangerous past. The war records had been clear. Earth had been glassed, its colonies burned, its people slaughtered. There should have been nothing left. And yet, here they were. Maybe they're just trying to scare us, one of the younger officers suggested, though his voice lacked conviction. Make a show of strength. Force us into negotiations. Does that look like a show to you? Rylos pointed at the fleet on the display. Because to me, it looks like an executioner's blade being raised. The room fell silent again. No one wanted to admit the truth, but they all felt it in their bones. This was not a warning. This was the storm before the strike. A sensor technician suddenly gasped, his fingers flying over his console. Sir, we have movement. Massive movement. All eyes turned to the holographic display as the technician pulled up the latest readings. The human fleet had stopped just outside the Alliance's outer defense perimeter. They had held formation for hours, unmoving, watching. But now, something had changed. The largest ship in the human fleet, a massive, ominous structure nearly twice the size of an Alliance dreadnought, had begun to shift. Its hull gleamed with dark, unfamiliar alloys, and its power signature spiked dangerously high. It was preparing for something. What are they doing? Cadris demanded. The technician's hands trembled as he analyzed the readings. Sir, they're charging weapons. A wave of horror swept through the war room. They wouldn't, an officer whispered. They can't be serious. But then the display changed. A massive surge of energy burst from the human flagship, a pulse so strong that every sensor in the system went into overload for a brief moment. The Alliance's outermost defense station simply ceased to exist. One moment, the station was there, armed, reinforced, ready to hold the line. The next, it was gone. Not damaged, not crippled, not left in burning wreckage. Gone. The silence in the war room was deafening. How? Cadris whispered, unable to find his voice. How is that possible? The weapons expert looked like he had just seen death itself. That wasn't a conventional weapon. That was something else, something beyond our understanding. That was a message, Rylos said, his voice grim. And I think we all know what it means. Before anyone could respond, the holographic display flickered. For the first time since the humans had appeared, they were sending a transmission. A single line of text appeared. "We are here for justice. You will not stop us." The galaxy had thought the war was over. But for humanity, it had just begun. Panic gripped the Galactic Alliance. The moment the human fleet destroyed the defense station without hesitation, every system in the known galaxy knew the war wasn't over. It had just begun. On Cavaris Prime, the War Council had descended into chaos. Military strategists argued over possible battle formations. Governors of distant colonies begged for immediate reinforcements. Merchant guilds and corporate leaders demanded protection for their trade routes. The ruling elite of the Alliance had spent centuries believing themselves untouchable, shielded by their powerful fleets, their vast resources, and the myth that humanity had been eradicated. But now, the truth was burning into their minds like a brand. Humanity had returned, and they were angry. Admiral Rylos stood at the center of the command chamber, his expression grim. He had fought in countless wars, led fleets against some of the most dangerous enemies the galaxy had ever known. But this was something different. "Have the humans responded to any hails?" Chancellor Cadris asked, though his voice carried little hope. The communications officer swallowed hard. "No, sir. They've only sent the one message." The words still hung in the air like a death sentence. "We are here for justice. You will not stop us." Justice for what? One of the council members hissed, slamming his fist against the table. "They were wiped out centuries ago. This makes no sense." "Clearly, they weren't," Rylos muttered. Across the room, an intelligence officer stepped forward, his face pale. "Sir, we may have an answer to why they are attacking." The room went silent. "Go on," Rylos said. The officer hesitated before speaking. "Sir, we've begun analyzing the human fleet's movement patterns, and it's becoming clear that they are not striking at random. Every major fleet deployment, every station they've engaged, even the warning shot on our outer defenses, it all points to one thing." "And what is that?" Chancellor Cadris asked impatiently. The officer took a deep breath. "The humans are following the exact path the Dominion used when they attacked Earth." A chill ran through the room. Rylos stiffened. "Are you certain?" "Beyond any doubt, sir. The routes match perfectly. It's as if they're retracing history, but in reverse." A dreadful realization dawned over them. "They aren't just attacking," Cadris whispered. "They're reclaiming." For centuries, the Galactic Dominion had erased any mention of their war against humanity. The few records that remained had been buried in classified archives, hidden from the public eye. The official story had always been that Earth was a dangerous and unpredictable force that had needed to be eliminated for the safety of the galaxy. But now it was clear that someone had survived. And not only had they survived, but they had spent centuries preparing for this very moment. A sudden alarm blared through the war room. Multiple hyperspace signatures detected. A technician called out, his voice barely controlled. "The human fleet is advancing." Rylos clenched his fists. "How many ships?" The technician's eyes darted over the data stream. "Sir, it's worse than we expected." The room held its breath. "There's more than one fleet," the technician continued. "We are detecting at least 4 major human battle groups converging on different sectors of Alliance space." Cadris paled. "They're hitting us from multiple sides." "Yes, sir. And there's something else." The technician hesitated before looking up. "The reports from our outer systems indicate that some of the colonies aren't resisting." A stunned silence followed. "What do you mean they aren't resisting?" an officer demanded. The technician licked his lips nervously. "Sir, Some of our colonies are surrendering willingly. The moment the humans arrive, they lower their defenses. In some cases, they even send out distress signals, asking to be taken in. Shock rippled through the war room. "This can't be happening," one of the admirals muttered. "Our own colonies betraying us." "They don't see it as betrayal," the intelligence officer whispered. "They see it as salvation." It made an awful kind of sense. The Dominion had ruled with an iron fist for centuries, conquering worlds, exploiting populations, and crushing rebellions before they could begin. Countless species had lived under oppression, forced to serve the ruling elite, dreaming of freedom that had never come. But now, the nightmare had returned. Only this time, it was not the Dominion hunting the weak. It was humanity, coming for revenge. Rylos turned back to the holographic display. The human fleet was closing in. Battle was inevitable. There was no more time for debate, no more room for hesitation. "Sound the evacuation alarms," he ordered. "Move the Council to a secure location, and prepare all remaining fleets for immediate engagement." Cadres turned to him sharply. "You're not seriously thinking of fighting them. What other choice do we have?" Rylos snapped. "If we don't fight, they will tear through us like a storm. The only way we survive this is if we show them we won't be broken." But even as he said it, he wasn't sure if he believed it. Because deep in his heart, he knew one thing for certain. The humans had come, and nothing in the galaxy could stop them now. The silence before the storm was unbearable. Across the Galactic Alliance, every world, every station, every fleet command held its breath. They had seen the reports. They had heard the desperate pleas from commanders at the outer colonies. They had watched in stunned disbelief as entire sectors fell without a single human casualty. And now, the humans had arrived at the heart of Dominion space. Admiral Rylos stood on the bridge of the Valor's Wrath, staring at the massive holographic display of the incoming human fleet. The numbers were staggering. Hundreds of ships, each of them sleek and efficient, arranged in perfect formation. But what was worse was their silence. Not a single attempt at negotiation. Not a single transmission. The humans didn't come to talk. They came to end this war. "Enemy fleet will be in range in 30 seconds, a tactical officer reported, his voice tense. "They're moving into attack formation." Rylos forced himself to stay calm. "Order all ships to prepare countermeasures. Do not let them." Incoming fire. The first human salvo struck like a lightning storm. Bright beams of energy lanced across the void, striking directly at the Dominion's forward battle lines. Massive cruisers, once thought impenetrable, were reduced to burning wrecks within seconds. Explosions rippled through the fleet as energy weapons cut through shields as if they weren't even there. Rylos barely had time to process the devastation before the second wave hit. The humans weren't just aiming for ships. They were dismantling the fleet. "They're targeting our command vessels." An officer shouted. "We're losing control of our formations." On the main display, Rylos watched in horror as a squadron of human strike fighters weaved through their defensive lines, effortlessly dodging counterfire. The Dominion's top pilots, trained from birth for space combat, couldn't land a single shot. Then the second human fleet arrived. "They flanked us," someone yelled. A new wave of human warships surged into the battle from the side, cutting off escape routes. The Dominion fleet was being crushed between two advancing forces, their positions collapsing faster than command could react. "We need to retreat." Chancellor Cadres' voice came through the comms, filled with panic. "Pull back to the inner system. We can't retreat." Rylos snapped. "If we fall back, they'll take the capital without resistance." "Then what do you suggest, Admiral?" Cadres demanded. "Our weapons barely scratch their ships. Our fighters are useless. We are losing." Rylos knew it was true. The Dominion's fleets had always relied on sheer numbers, overwhelming firepower, and the fear of their name. But the humans weren't afraid. In fact, the way they moved, the way they struck with such precision, It was as if they had already won. "Sir, we have enemy forces boarding our ships." Rylos turned sharply. "Boarding? They're sending in ground troops." "Yes, sir." And the officer hesitated. "They're not killing the crews." That made no sense. This was war. The Dominion had never taken prisoners in battle. Why would the humans? "Show me the security feeds." The screens flickered, and the bridge crew fell silent as the footage played. Human soldiers, clad in unmarked battle armor, were storming through the corridors of Dominion ships. But instead of slaughtering their way through, they moved with purpose, stunning guards, disabling weapons, locking down key systems. They were taking the ships intact. "They're seizing control," Rylos whispered. A realization hit him like a hammer. The humans weren't fighting a war. They were replacing the Dominion. Chancellor Cadorus must have come to the same conclusion. "We must escape," he shouted. "We must flee to the core worlds before they reach us." Rylos clenched his fists. "And then what? We leave billions to die. We let them take everything." "They already have." The words cut deep. But before Rylos could respond, another alarm blared. "Sir," a technician stammered. We have new signals appearing in the system." Rylos' eyes narrowed. "More human ships?" The technician looked up, face pale. "No, sir. It's our own fleet." For a moment, there was silence. Then, as the data updated, the horror settled in. Entire squadrons of Dominion warships were switching sides. "They're surrendering," another officer whispered. "They're joining the humans." Rylos could hardly believe what he was seeing. Flagships of the Dominion, the pride of the Alliance, were turning against them. Crews were sending out surrender signals. Some were even welcoming the humans aboard. And then, the final, crushing blow came. The main comms channel crackled to life. A voice, calm, strong, and unmistakably human, spoke for the first time. "Your rule is over. Surrender now, and you will be spared." The words sent a chill through everyone on the bridge. They've won," someone whispered. Rylos refused to believe it. He turned to his crew, to his officers, to the shattered remains of what was once the greatest fleet in the galaxy. "We still have forces left," he said. "We still have time to turn this around." Cadorus shook his head. "You don't get it, Admiral." He gestured to the display where Dominion ships continued to defect. "They didn't just defeat us." Cadorus' voice was hollow. "They replaced us." The bridge of the Valor's wrath was silent. The Dominion fleet, once the most feared force in the galaxy, was crumbling before their eyes. Warships were no longer fighting. They were surrendering in droves. Entire armadas, once loyal to the Dominion, had turned their weapons off, opening their hatches to human forces without resistance. Admiral Rylos stood motionless, his fists clenched, his mind racing. How had it come to this? The Dominion had ruled for centuries, crushing rebellions, expanding their borders, and ensuring their dominance. They had fought countless wars, defeated countless enemies. Yet none had been like the humans. Across the view screens, human warships drifted into position, but they weren't destroying the Dominion's remaining forces. They were absorbing them. One by one, battlecruisers and dreadnoughts were seized intact. Human strike teams moved with terrifying efficiency, locking down entire fleets without a single unnecessary casualty. It was a military campaign unlike any Rylos had ever seen. "Sir," an officer's voice wavered, snapping Rylos out of his daze. "We're receiving." A direct transmission from the human flagship. The bridge fell into an even deeper silence. No one spoke. No one moved. Until now, the humans hadn't sent any messages. They had fought with brutal precision, dismantling the Dominion's fleets without a single declaration, a single taunt, a single word. And now, they were finally reaching out. "Patch it through," Rylos said, his voice tight. The main screen flickered. A single figure appeared, a human, standing tall, clad in a dark uniform without any insignia. His face was calm, his expression unreadable. His eyes, however, carried weight, a silent authority that sent an unnatural chill down Rylo's spine. When the human spoke, his voice was steady, almost dispassionate. "Admiral Rylos of the Dominion Fleet, your war is over." The words hit like a hammer. Some officers turned away. Others slumped in their seats, their faces pale. Rylos, however, refused to break. He forced himself to stand tall, to meet the human's gaze. "You expect us to just surrender?" The human didn't flinch. Many already have. Rylos felt his jaw tighten. "And those who don't?" The human tilted his head slightly. "Then you will be erased." It wasn't a threat. It wasn't even a boast. It was a fact. Rylos had spent his life studying war, leading fleets, conquering worlds. He had faced countless enemies, some stronger, some smarter, some desperate enough to fight until the bitter end. But never had he faced certainty like this. The humans had already won. They weren't seeking negotiations. They weren't offering terms. They weren't even celebrating their victory. They were simply taking control. "Why?" Rylos asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Why did you wait until now to speak?" The human's expression didn't change. "Because words don't matter to your kind." The answer was sharp, cutting deeper than Rylos had expected. "For centuries," the human continued, "your dominion has ruled through fear. You crushed civilizations before they could resist. You silenced dissent before it could spread. You never listened. You only took." Rylos had no response, because the human was right. "And now," the human said, "we do the same." The bridge remained silent. The Dominion officers, once proud warriors, were now powerless spectators. The human didn't wait for a reply. His gaze remained locked onto Rylos, but his voice carried across the entire fleet. "The Dominion is no more." The words echoed across every channel, across every remaining warship, across every world that had once feared the Dominion's name. The Empire was over, and the humans had taken its place. A new order had begun.